back to Big Blue Kickoff Live right here on Giants.com and the Giants mobile app. Paul Dottino, John Schmeelk with you, joined by Mike Renner, who is the draft master, king, guru.
All those.
Like all that. I always like doing this too. He's the author of the Pro Football Focus Draft Guide, and I'm a dinosaur. So I still print this out. I know Mike always gets a kick out of it whenever I print this out and I show it to him.
This year we put some work in on the graphic design. Not me, but
our
graphics team is
the presentation's immaculate.
Yeah,
it really is cool.
And by the way, this will be about twice the size when you're done with it in about a month?
Yeah, we're gonna get to 250, so over twice the size.
Woo.
Yeah, and honestly, I try to have our guy at the Giants print it for me, and they can't get it into one spiral. Seriously, I have one offense, one defense, so that's how it goes. All right, Mike. So let's start here. I guess we got to start the news of the day, right?
Yeah.
How about this Jalen Carter stuff, man? For the fans that haven't heard, there was an early report today that he was involved in the car accident that cost the life of one of his teammates in Georgia. Then shortly after that, charges were filed for reckless driving in the case. What's the impact of this here, Mike, as we move forward?
Yeah, obviously a pending legal situation. I'm not going to speculate on what that's exactly going to be, but I think if you're one of those teams who was banking on him being there in top 4, top 5, thinking that that's your guy, I just don't see that happening anymore. If all those facts are true, if that's actually the case, I don't see looking your fan base in the eye with a number 3 overall pick, number 2 overall pick, number 4 overall pick, and saying the guy who just was involved in a tragic accident is the guy we're going to be taking. So it would be difficult to see, but there does become a sort of conversation though. At some point, it is worth the risk to NFL teams because wins still matter. So I think he's going to fall in the top 5, but I do think he's still probably going to be a first rounder if he's not, if the legal situation plays itself out and he's not in jail.
So the news cycle drops that on us this morning. But prior to coming here to Indianapolis, what did you think the biggest storyline would be coming out of the week?
Oof, the biggest storyline, I think it was going to be the quarterbacks in this class. It was going to be Bryce Young's height, and it was going to be Anthony Richardson's just absurd, freakish tools. And so I think that's going to be the biggest storyline, and then just who goes 1 and the trade possibilities of the number 1 overall pick, which now obviously the Cardinal news throws somewhat of a wrench into and what the Bears would want to do, because obviously that's the guy they would have targeted should they have stayed at, somewhere at number 1.
But also how far they will go down,
exactly,
right?
yeah. So now maybe number 4, they might not even get a Will Anderson, Jalen Carter in this draft class, which was kind of those two are in the tier of their own. Anyone after that from I guess that'd be, those 2 guys, then the rest of the sort of position players, non-quarterbacks in the class. There's probably a group of about 10 guys that I have similar grades on. So if you're at pick 4 versus pick 12 in this draft class, it really doesn't matter that much.
Right. So then are they more willing then to go down to 9 with Carolina? Because they could, with the way with the way that owner is desperate to get a quarterback, what they might be willing to give up to move up, it'll be crazy. All right, let's dig in here, Mike, to the class a little bit in general. Generally speaking, sweet spot value-wise for Giants at 25. I'm sure you haven't gotten many 25th pick in the draft questions this week so far. What's the sweet spot in terms of value for where you're going to get the best player at 25 in this year's class?
That's a great question. I think the position groups that are deep are, in my opinion, running back, tight end, cornerback. So I think that last one there, cornerback, is probably the position that at pick 25 versus what you're usually going to get at pick 25 for the cornerback position, you might be getting a guy who in other drafts, say weaker cornerback drafts, could go pick 10 to 15. So I think that's probably the sweet spot because it's so deep. I think I have 6 first-round grades in this cornerback class. It's just, there's a lot of talent.
I want to ask you about receiver for a second, because if the Giants were to go corner, getting a very good player at 25, they don't go again until 57, okay? At 57, how would you feel about them? Maybe they're taking the dip for a wide receiver. Somebody like Tillman, maybe, could he be there from Tennessee?
Yeah, I think it has to be pick 1 or pick 2, right? Wide receiver is a position that once you get to the back end of the 3rd round, the track record of wide receivers hitting at that point and into day 3 is just very low.
There aren't many Terry McLaurins out there.
Exactly, and even Terry McLaurin is still a top 75. He went top of the 3rd round. Back end of the 3rd round, back end of outside of the top 75 picks, you don't find a lot. So I do think that is the floor of where I'm willing to address wide receiver, and you're not going to get this class doesn't have a ton of blue chippers at the wide receiver position, but it does have depth. There are a lot of guys, and I do think that because maybe we don't see him go top 10, top 15 in this draft class just because of there's no real guy there, I think that could push sort of down boards a lot of wide receivers. And at pick 57, you could be getting a guy like a Tank Dell in this draft class that is a difference maker right away at the wide receiver position in the 2nd round.
All right, let's dig into the wide receivers a little bit more then, because you have Isaiah Hodgins, who's kind of the bigger possession type of guy, right? You have Wan'Dale Robinson coming off an ACL, yes, but 5'9". I think you probably consider him primarily a slot-only guy.
Yeah.
So we just said we're going to have Ben Solak on, and we were chatting with him earlier today, and he was just like, you want to find that 6'1" guy that can separate and is a good route runner, can do a little bit of everything, but that guy doesn't exist in this class. Well, if you're trying to find that guy and you're Mike Renner, general manager, what players are you looking for that can kind of fit that? I used the name before, that Terry McLaurin type of guy that can kind of just be the guy that's going to get open for you outside.
Yeah, separator. The show and even said
correct.
Like that's what he looks for is guys who get open, like the suddenness that it takes to create that separation at the NFL level.
But also aren't 5'9".
Yes,
is,
because that's Wan'Dale is already kind of in that mold, but he's limited because of his catch radius. You're just not on the outside. The windows have to be. You have to give your quarterback a little bigger window, give him a little more margin for error because of how difficult those throws are to the sideline. And when you are, like I said, 5'9", 5'10", like you just don't give that. So to me, there's not a lot of guys that fit that bill in this draft class. Jordan Addison probably the best in that mold.
Does he get to 25?
And that's the thing is because of that, because everyone's kind of looking for that, he probably goes a little bit higher. Quentin Johnson, I think, can separate better than maybe he's getting billed as, and I think he's a true outside type of vertical route tree guy that can win there.
Really good after the catch for a guy that size.
Yes, that as well. And it's like, but does he get to 25? I do think you'll see probably a run where I would expect in like the mid-teens, you're probably going to see those four guys that everyone's talking about as first rounders with Quentin Johnson, Jordan Addison, we just talked about, Zay Flowers from Boston College, Jackson Smith-Njigba from Ohio State. I think you're going to see a little bit of a run on that. So it wouldn't surprise me with the Giants and their desperate need maybe to bump up a little to get into that mix of this wide receiver class.
One quick follow-up, Paul.
Yeah.
You mentioned Njigba. Your colleague Sam Monson is on the I think he can play outside train. I had Daniel Jeremiah on yesterday. He goes, I see him as a slot-only guy. There seems to be differing in opinions on that because he was a slot-only guy at Ohio State when he played 2 years ago. This year, you really can't get anything out of what he did, right? So do you think he's a guy that can move outside? Is 40 time going to be big to determine that this week? How do you view Smith-Njigba?
I think it will be big because last time we saw him was his sophomore year. And I go back to Justin Jefferson and his sophomore year versus his junior year. He was a completely different player. We didn't get to see what he could, his completely, that third year. Like he was only 19 the last time we saw Jackson Smith-Njigba. So there could be some more speed, some more physical development left in the tank that we just didn't get to see because he was so hampered with a hamstring all year. So if he comes here and goes, 4.45 or something like that.
Why can't he play outside?
Then,
right?
then exactly. Then I think you are looking at a guy who can play on the outside. But on tape, as a sophomore, I was expecting high 4.5s, low 4.6s, which is in this day and age, if you're running that, you better be 6'3", 6'4" to play on the outside, and he's obviously not.
All right, I want to ask you about two positions Joe Shane, the Giants GM, mentioned to us in his media avail yesterday. He said, look, he knows that they're thin on the defensive line, and it's harder and harder to find good defensive tackles these days because the crops coming out are not very fertile. All right, let's also talk about the inside linebacker spot, which is also not very deep. So I think they got to draft a defensive tackle if they can find somebody somewhere on that second or third day, early on that third day. But I'm interested about the inside linebacker spot because Darian Beavers, who was taken out of Cincinnati in the 6th round last year and had a sensational camp before he hurt his knee, I wonder what you think his upside might be, and is his upside better than taking an inside linebacker in maybe the 3rd round?
That's a great question. I love Beavers coming out. I think I had him just outside the top 100 on the PFF board. I don't think he's ever going to be like a high-end coverage player, but he's a great between the tackles type of linebacker that you're not going to complain about in the running game, not going to complain about in zone coverage. So I was a fan of him coming out, and I think he's probably penciling him pretty firmly in as a starter. But in this linebacker class, there's not a lot of great options. I mean, there's not a lot of guys I have better grades than I did Beavers coming out last year. It's just a weak class, and the problem also with it is the guys who are kind of the higher-end linebackers in this class, a lot of them are like sub-230. Which
Trenton Simpson.
Yes, like or like right around that 230 range, which
he'll look like safeties.
Yes,
Mike.
which is kind of like getting away from. I think NFL is not trending towards smaller linebackers anymore. The smaller linebackers are playing like in the slot nowadays. So I do think teaching guys to play between the tackles at the NFL level, a lot of teams have regretted that in recent years with draft picks. So this linebacker class, I don't want to touch any of the guys in this linebacker class before like the 3rd round.
Not even Sanders? I know he's one of the guys that people have kind of talked about early.
If you really blitz a ton, and obviously the Giants do, if you really do that a lot, that's the only scheme I could see him fitting into. But he was an edge that played off ball this past year that really still looked like an edge. Like it's just he's getting that hype because he is a high end athlete, because he does rush the passer so well. But watching him try to tackle in space, watching him try to cover in space, it's like he's very far away in that regard.
All right, Paul mentioned the defensive tackles. Let me dig into that class a little bit here. What's the sweet spot if you're looking to add somebody as a kind of interior defensive line, maybe even a 5 technique type?
And he's probably a rotation guy considering what the Giants have to start.
And by the way, maybe a potential replacement for Leonard Williams, who is on the last year of his deal.
So DT class is fairly weak. I think I have, obviously Jalen Carter at the top, but like after that, 2 other first-round grades. Brian Brzee, the Clemson DT, and Kalijah Cansey, who's like a pure 3 technique. He's like 280 pounds. He's not going to fit a lot of schemes. So I don't think 25, that makes sense for the Giants either way. This DT class is just after that, though, it gets even worse in my opinion. There's just not a lot of guys. You got a couple nose tackles that I think if they're there on the board for the Giants could make sense. That can have a little versatility in Siaki Ika from Baylor and Mozzie Smith from Michigan, but you're really not getting pass rush out of a ton of guys in this DT class after the 1st round.
What do you think of the Northwestern kid? I was a fan of his in Mobile, and he's kind of built the same way as Cansey is, except I think he's even thicker than he is, to be honest with you.
So he's got a unique build in that he's 6'1", but has like a 6'10" wingspan.
Right.
But he played edge at Northwestern. So he's a guy that really only played probably a couple hundred snaps inside in his career, which it's a little different, playing edge to inside is different, but then edge to inside against NFL caliber strength is a lot different. So he's a guy who, out the gate, like you said, if you're thinking year 2, year 3, he's a guy who could probably develop into that, but out the gate is probably not a guy you want to see in the field right away.
You got time for one more for me?
One more, Paul.
Okay, hypothetical. Let's just say Saquon Barkley does not stick with the Giants.
Okay.
And they've got to go out and get themselves a running back who will fit what Brian Dable and Mike Kafka do in their scheme. How deep can they go before being forced to take someone who's going to be productive in that system?
I think this class especially, I said it was one of the strongest positions. I think you could probably get one in the 3rd. Back end of the 3rd, there's still probably going to be a guy there that can be a bell cow type of running back. That's just how many there are in this draft class.
Who do you like in that spot?
I really like Zach Charbonnet from UCLA. Now, not sure if he makes it that far.
He might not test well, which might help him get that far.
He may only run like 4.59, 4.6, something in that range. He's not a super high-end athlete, but he's got great contact balance, and he's carried a hefty workload there at UCLA. So that's a guy I really like in that mold if you are looking in the 3rd round.
Promote what you want to promote, Mike. What do you got?
I got the draft guide that you
so lift it up again.
Beautifully printed out there.
There you go.
That's 100 players right now, going to be 150 after the combine, going to have all the combine data analysis after as well, and then 250 by draft day. So if you want to go check it out on pff.com.
That is John's version of the bench press at the combine.
And then you're also doing the PFF NFL podcast, correct? A couple times a week?
A couple times a week on the PFF NFL podcast. So make sure to check that as well.
Awesome. Mike Renner, thanks.